Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Business Innovators Radio. This is your host, Constant Taylor. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, and they're going to share some very exciting information with us. So, if you're looking to increase your personal and professional effectiveness, then you've come to the right place. Our special guest today is Diane Amundson. Diane has been speaking professionally for over 20 years, and the content that she primarily speaks on is team building, conflict resolution, generational diversity, and strategic planning. She's primarily spoken nationally, but has spoken internationally as well, and is based out of Minnesota. Diane, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
And we're glad to have you. I'd like to kick off the show by asking you if you could tell the listeners a little bit about your business and how you help your clients become more effective.
So I've been in this business of training, speaking, consulting since roughly 1992, and I enjoy helping organizations improve their communication so their employees are more productive. And that's where generational diversity, understanding that and having tools to overcome those issues between millennials and boomers, helping with strategic planning, which helps you focus in on more on what's important and put your resources there, reducing conflict where there's interpersonal conflict or groups not getting along, and then good old-fashioned team building. How do we move our team to a higher level of performance? Those are the pieces that I use to help organizations.
Okay. So, the generational diversity is so timely, especially with the gap with the social media and the previous generation that did not have that. How do you help to bridge that gap in the areas of technology, social media?
Well, first of all, understand that every generation has a gift to offer. It's not about one being better than the other. They're just different based on the things that they grew up with, the events that impacted them, their parents, their teachers, and the times. And so as boomers, which I happen to have one foot in, I have one foot in Gen X, we have to understand that in order to get ahead, we really wanted to work longer and harder than anyone else. And that may not be the value of Generation X and Y. But what's interesting right now is Gen Y just now surpassed the baby boomers in terms of percentage in the workplace. Gen Y is at 34%. The boomers are roughly 33%. So it's a whole new world now if we've got more millennials in the workplace. So we have to understand that technology is here to stay. As boomers, we have to hold our feet to the fire and make sure we're learning the technology and know that we can do it, but we still like the people side of business. We love to talk to people face-to-face and over the phone just as much as email.
Very, very insightful. Now, could you describe to me your perfect client or perfect prospective client?
Yeah, certainly. I work with a lot of CEOs of small organizations, associations, and nonprofits. I happen to have a background in HR, so I help a lot of HR directors and managers, and they're often the way into an organization is they see the problems firsthand as employees come to them. And then also I work with county governments. Human service directors seem to have a lot of need for my services. And I work with chambers of commerce throughout the United States also because they're putting on leadership classes, and I'm asked to come in and speak on these 4 topics.
Now, with those clients, what are some of the problems that they encounter, and how do you help them work through those problems?
So a lot of times I'm getting called because a team is not performing at a certain level, whether that be a leadership team or a middle management team. And it could be something as simple as not understanding how to effectively run a meeting. Or it could be a new leader that doesn't really understand the aspects of good leadership. They got promoted up the ranks because they were technically good at something. But when you become a manager, it's a different ballgame. It's the people side of the business. Or I may get called in because of a conflict between 2 groups, 2 individuals, or 2 departments. And then I get called in also just to help enlighten and bring new information about leadership, and especially as it pertains to the different generations. So really across the board, and I guess finally strategic planning, I get called in because organizations are trying to refocus with limited resources. How do we get more done? and stop kind of in this cage, with the mouse in the cage that goes round and round, doesn't feel like they're getting anywhere. So I help them create focus and use their resources smarter.
Now, what would you say is your secret sauce with your customers?
What makes me different? I think I've really thought long and hard about that, and I've counted over. I've got 10 different certifications in tools that are probably the best in the industry. For instance, the situational leadership, some of Blanchard's work, the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, the Thomas Kilmann Instrument. And I've got about 10 of these that have been researched well and are probably the best out there. And when people call me, I really listen to what is their problem. Sometimes I have to articulate it for them because they're unclear about what the problem is. We get that articulated, and then I take out one of these tools and help them improve the situation. And then probably the last thing is that I use humor. And I spent a lot of time understanding how people react much better to good content with humor. And I think that separates me from others.
Interesting. Have you ever done any stand-up?
No, I haven't. I spent 4 days in Las Vegas with comedians, looking at their craft and how they go about it. And I don't consider myself a comedian, rather a humorist. And so I try to add lightness and humor to every presentation, and then people walk away more engaged and remember the material better. And besides, as a speaker and a trainer, it's a lot more fun.
Now, I'd like to take a step back and find out a little bit about your background and how you came to the position that you're in now. Where did you start? Again, you had a background in human resources.
Actually with sales. I started with the General Mills and a territory in Chicago. So as a young person right out of college, kind of thrown into a big city and trying to sell to grocery stores, the Jewel and Eagles of the world, the Betty Crocker product line. So that really, I cut my teeth on business through sales, which I think was a great beginning. And then I went into Pepsi-Cola, where I competed with Coca-Cola in the Green Bay market, and that opened my eyes as well to the small business owner and being able to sell on non-price points of difference. And then I moved into a human resource role in a company that sold HR products. So it was a combination of HR and sales. And then I had a mentor. So that mentor really helped me craft my training and speaking abilities. And so without her, I would not be where I am today. So it was a combination of all of those.
So was it, did you find it to be a huge adjustment being on the front line of sales where, everything happens, transitioning into human resources where it's more of a back office and internal function?
And what's really interesting is I wasn't the, quote, HR manager of any company. What I was doing was with a staffing company selling HR services.
Okay.
So I had to know the HR product. I had to understand HR inside and out, but I was actually selling that to companies. So small companies that had less than 100 employees and needed HR consulting, needed employees when the unemployment rate was low. That's where I had 2 offices of staff that went out and did that. So it still was the sales position, but the product this time was HR.
Okay, understand. Okay. Now, what are one or two popular misconceptions about the services that you provide or the value that you add, and how do you dispel those misconceptions?
I think people think there's a one-size-fits-all or we need a quick fix here. Problems are complex and solutions are complex, and human beings are complex. So it's really important to understand that you might need several tools. You might need to do this over a period of time instead of come in and do a 2-hour workshop and hopefully we'll fix everything. And then inside of that is a lot of leaders want me to come and speak to a group of people when the real conflict involves one individual. So they would rather have me train to a group and hope that one individual gets it, when in fact they usually don't. And they look around and think it's everybody else. So oftentimes leaders are afraid to confront individuals about problems and would rather just throw it out to the group.
Do you have a case study, business case, where you took a client who was struggling in one of the areas that you specialize in, be it team building, conflict resolution, or strategic planning, and you're actually able to help them turn the situation around?
Well, when you look at strategic planning, I've worked with so many organizations that just were not focused. And so what would happen is the director thought we were going this way, and the board of directors thought they were going this way. And with limited resources, especially nonprofit organizations needing to learn to work lean and mean, I would help come in and help get great clarity and consensus on where the group wants to go. And once we have that, we can get very creative and brainstorm with the resources that we have. How do we get there? And so numerous organizations walking through that process. And then really helping to find what is a vision, that city on the hill we're trying to create. What's the mission? It's how we're going to get there. What are the core values? Or like a rudder on the ship. They help guide us in making decisions. And so with those definitions in place, and with really good understanding and listening to each other, we create plans to help people in the next 3 to 5 years, because change is happening too quickly. Most people now want a 2 to 3 year plan, believe it or not. So I think that's evidence. In other areas where there's conflict, I've had to come in and work with 2 individuals that are in conflict, and they come in with misunderstandings. I do interviews of people around those individuals, and then I bring them together and use a process of reflective listening. And by the end of it, they have a much better understanding of the situation and are working together more effectively. I have numerous stories of that as well.
Reflective listening, what does that entail?
So really, it's where you're speaking, and usually the one that is the most hostile, the one that is most upset between 2 individuals will start. And they'll simply tell what the situation is and how they feel about it. And then I ask the other person, the other party, to actually repeat back what they heard instead of trying to get their ducks in a row and fire back. And when I repeat this back and forth, so the first person speaks, the next one reflects back, and then that person gets to speak, and the first person reflects back. And through that forced listening and that calming down, people begin to hear each other for the very, very first time, and it clarifies so many misunderstandings. And then it opens up to the brain to possibility thinking instead of shutting down all the time. And so it's a process that I use. I call it the creative conversation, and it really helps move from conflict to consensus and from obstacles to opportunities and seeing possibilities.
Very interesting. Now, what do you think is the main challenges that some organizations have with deciding to use your services, and how do you convince them that your service would be beneficial to them?
Well, first of all, I think leaders are afraid. Many of them are afraid that they're going to learn something about themselves that they don't want to hear. And at least 50% of the time, the conflict within a team is because of the leaders. So that's a hard thing to swallow. What if I bring Diane in and we uncover something about myself and I have to learn something really hard about myself? That's not always a great place to be. Second thing would probably be fees. When something arises that's not in the budget, it's oftentimes hard to get those fees to do some real proactive work. And then third, I would say it's not easy, especially if it's a conflict situation. With the Thomas Kilmann instrument, I show you that there's 5 different styles of handling conflict. And I was just with a group the other day. The culture of the organization is to accommodate and avoid. And if that's coming from the leader, none of the other folks are going to want to confront conflict and deal with it. So they don't want to deal with it. Sometimes it's easier to bury your head in the sand or just to give in to people. And so I think those are some reasons. Conflict is not an easy thing. And oftentimes we learn from our parents, either the fight or flight. And depending on what you grew up with is how well you deal with conflict. And many of us are just not taught it in school or through parents. So it's not easy, and those would be the primary reasons, and I think why people are hesitant to pick up the phone or email.
Now, with you cover conflict resolution, generational diversity. Is there anywhere in conflict resolution? We have bullies in schools when we're younger, but those same bullies grow up to be bullies in the corporate area. Do you deal with that at all in conflict?
Well, that really becomes a management issue. I write a newsletter every Monday, and I talk on these kinds of topics. And so many of my newsletters are certainly just written purely on the aspect of how do you manage someone who's not performing well. And if they're not a good team player, or if they're bullying individuals, That's serious. And most companies have in their handbook a progressive discipline process where you first give a verbal warning and then a written verbal and all that. And I always encourage to have written warnings every step of the way. And in the end, you have to manage that person. You have to say, here are the expectations, here's unacceptable behavior. This will no longer go on. If it happens again, it could lead to termination. And that's what a manager has to do. They have to be able to have those tough conversations. And that's just good old management 101. And many managers are afraid to do it, especially if they're afraid of the bully.
Mm-hmm. With the last minute that we have here, I'd like for you, if you could, to convey one concept or thought to the listeners so that if they don't get anything else out of the discussion, this is what I would like to leave them with.
Sure. I think in my leadership journey, and all of us are on a journey to become better leaders, there would be two components I'd like to leave. And these are things that I continue to struggle with myself, so I know they're hard. The first is to become the best possible listener you can be. Listening well opens up so many doors. It connects you more to your employees. It connects you to your spouse and to your children. And if you could hone in one skill and spend time working on that, it would be listening. And the second skill set I would work on as a leader, everyone talks about being a great visionary and great communicator, but being vulnerable is important. I think that gets left off. And I don't mean weak. I simply mean being willing and able to say I was wrong. I'm sorry. You know more than I do. I made a mistake. Those 4 phrases, if you could get good at saying that, you'll find people want to follow you. You'll find that people want to listen to what you have to say. So listening and showing vulnerability are two things I never learned, and probably learned the hard way how important they are.
That would also eliminate 90% of our political problems as well, vulnerability. Definitely use some of that in the government, right?
Yes, especially right now.
Yeah.
So, the listening part to constituents and then also showing some humility would go a long way right now in that area.
Now, if the listeners would like to contact your organization, learn more about the services that you provide and possibly engage with your company, what's the best way for them to contact you?
There's a couple ways. My website is DianeAmundson.com, DianeAmundson.com. And from there, you're going to find my newsletter you could sign up for. You're going to find a way to contact me, my business phone line, which is 507-452-2232. And then finally, my email address is Diane@DianeAmundson.com. So those 3 ways would be the best to connect with me.
Okay, fantastic. Diane, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was very, very fascinating information that you shared with the listeners, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the time, and hopefully I was able to help someone with just one issue today.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.